So I'm really honored to be here and to have the chance to provide you an overview of this i2010 Digital Libraries Commission initiative for our cultural heritage and scientific information. I've been working on this initiative since its beginning in 2005 as I work in the unit Digital Libraries and Public Sector Information of the European Commission based in Luxembourg. This unit is part of the Information Society and Media Directorate General of the Commission, led by Commissioner Viviane Reding. But let's now come to the context that led to the initiative. i2010 Digital Libraries is a part of, I think it's a so-called flagship project of the Commission's overall strategy to boost the digital economy, known as i2010. The initiative follows a letter by 6 heads of state and government addressed to the President of the European Commission, Barroso, in 2005, where they were advocating the creation of a European digital library meant as a common access point to the distributed cultural heritage in Europe in order to make Europe's cultural and scientific heritage more accessible and easy to use. The former president of the French Republic, Chirac, had an important role in pushing this initiative, also in relation to the activism of the former president of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Jean-Noël Jeanneney. The Commission replied positively to the invitation of the 6 heads of state and presented a communication called i2010 Digital Libraries. This was September 2005, where the Commission announced the policy lines, that it intended to follow. This communication was followed by another one dealing specifically with scientific information in the digital age, access, dissemination and preservation. I'll give you more details about this later on. What's in the background? What's the context in which the initiative was born? For sure, Google Book, at the time Google Print, now known as Google Book Search, was announced in Europe, I think, at the Frankfurt Book Fair in October 2004. And that put in motion, clearly, an important process global-wise. We had reactions by the other internet giants and ICT giants, Microsoft, Yahoo, joining into this open content alliance, problems with copyright, as we know, and clearly in Europe, this was at least the French perspective, also probably based on linguistic consideration, but for sure also on cultural consideration, led to this development in Europe. On the background, I also like to mention the tradition of research of EU-funded projects that the Commission had been funding for at least 15 years, starting from the 4th framework program, the telematic application programs, and also through the i10 program, Trans-European Networks. So I would say, starting from the early 90s, we had in Europe good activities and research being carried out on digital libraries. And this had had also a political development, even if still somehow at an informal level, through the creation of mechanism of coordination, governmental coordination on digitization, namely through the network known as Minerva. We distinguish within the Digital Libraries Initiative two main blocks, one relating to cultural content and the other to scientific information. I should immediately, we are dealing today with humanities, and of course that put the distinction into crisis immediately. Does it make sense to decide whether Galileo's manuscripts or Einstein articles are cultural heritage rather than scientific heritage? No, it doesn't. The Commission, we felt anyhow that nowadays the production of science, in particular in hard sciences, has specificities that require a specific communication and putting in place specific policy measures, because, for example, we cannot forget that already today in the STM, so-called World Scientific, Technical and Medical, which has, for example, among publishers, scientific publishers, a specific representation. I'm not aware of how many humanities and social sciences journals are represented by this, but say in this more hard sciences framework, about 90% of journals is already published digitally and goes online. And so in a way, digitization is less relevant today in hard science. What's the aim? The aim is simple and ambitious at the same time, to make Europe's cultural and scientific heritage accessible to all, to facilitate access for study, leisure, entertainment. The initiative deals with any type of material of media, books, newspapers, films, archival records, to the extent they are either digital or can be digitized. And it was already mentioned that not only today a small percentage of digitized libraries collection, libraries and archives and museums collection is digitized and available online. But this is something we've recently found out through a questionnaire we sent to member states. A considerable amount, it seems the majority of the digitized content is not available online through the internet. That means that it's either accessible only on site, and we know there are copyright, IPR restrictions to that, but it seems that a considerable part of it is not used at all. And of course the metaphor of a dark archive, an archive, a repository without access, where, yeah, of course it would serve preservation purposes, but I think it's not exactly what we are aiming to, because this is one of the points I would like to make. Access is the central issue, and also digitization has to be seen in the context of access. In fact, the activity, the initiative addresses three steps in relation to what could be called the life cycle of digital content: digitization, online accessibility, and digital preservation. Digitization can be defined as ensuring the availability of digital content in the case we don't have digital content. Online accessibility, as I said, the central element, easy access for all. Digital preservation can be simply defined as ensuring access on the long term. So it's again, an access-related concept. I'll come now to the levels of work that we are following in the Digital Libraries Initiative. There is a kind of upper political level, meaning in particular the EU interinstitutional arena, populated by the Commission itself, but also by the European Parliament and by the Council of Ministers and by EU member states, of course. The visible outputs of this level are policy documents. I already mentioned the communication through which the Commission announced its lines of actions, but quite important, the Commission issued a recommendation to Member States about digitization, online accessibility and digital preservation. This was in 2006. A recommendation is a non-binding piece of legislation, so it's not like a regulation or a directive, but it's anyhow a piece of legislation and Member States have a moral obligation to follow it. On the basis of the recommendation, the other two top EU institutions, the Council and the Parliament, adopted respectively a conclusion and resolution where they basically supported, strongly supported what the Commission was proposing, in particular the creation of a European digital library, meant as a unique access point to European cultural heritage. I would also like to mention that following the Council invitation, the Commission set up a Member States expert group on digitization, where each Member State sends its representative to follow the implementation of the recommendation. A second level of action concerns work with stakeholders. By stakeholders we mean cultural institutions, of course, right holders, very important, publishers and authors, IT companies, and of course universities, academia. We conducted an online consultation, and that was at the beginning together with the communication, and we received kind of 250 replies that were very important for us to gather input for further developing our policy. And we set up a high-level expert group on digital libraries, composed by 20 personalities that have as task to advise the Commission on digital libraries issues, and also to work to try to clear, to advance on difficult issues, example, copyright, IPR. So to arrive at a shared common view on the strategic development of digital libraries in Europe. As it was mentioned before, I could mention the three British or UK-based persons that are in this group. One is Nikesh Arora, the Vice President of Google for European Operation, who's I think Indian American but is based in London. Lina Brindley, the CEO of the British Library, is another member, and the third British member is Stella Dutton. She's I think the director of the British Medical Journal. I'll come later on the working of the high-level expert group. The third level I would like to mention is what we call technical intervention. And by that we mean financial support by EU programs, co-funding through our financial instruments to projects that are selected on the basis of a call for proposals, therefore on a competitive basis. But clearly we are trying to orient and to steer the objectives of our programs and of our calls towards our policy objectives, realizing a European digital library and realizing better conditions for all digital libraries in Europe. Research and development programs, the Content Plus, formerly i10, are the main instruments. Last, but probably most concrete and visible, the operational level, establishing what was originally called European Digital Library, and that has now found, again thanks to the French, so as we are at the Maison Française, we have to thank France again. Europeana was initially used for a French portal, and then in this setting it has been decided that Europeana will be the brand of the European Digital Library. At this political institutional level, what is happening right now? Some updates. I mentioned this recommendation of the Commission to Member States. This is a piece of legislation, and the Commission is in charge of monitoring how Member States is implementing. We've received the first set of reports by all Member States. We are analyzing them, and the Commission will produce an overall report which takes the form of the Commission communication that will be presented to Council and Parliament, possibly in July. As we are still in the preparation phase, I cannot be very precise on what is the result of this evaluation of the status of the Union, to say so, on digitization, accessibility and digital preservation. The report is available on the net. Later on you will see the Digital Libraries Initiative website. So those are the individual report by Member States, and then you can see what is the official replies of the various countries on the issue on the recommendation of the Commission. What we can say is that there is in the EU good support to Europeana, to the concept of having a unique portal, that there is slow progress in, for example, achieving better conditions for copyright. For example, on orphan works, out-of-print works, that were some of the areas that the Commission had highlighted. We haven't seen that much difference. And that another critical area is probably, as we are talking about digitization, funding of digitization, and a proper planning, the development of national strategies for digitization. The situation in Member States is quite diverse, but overall we can say that the picture is evolving towards a coordinated approach. What is sure is that digital libraries will be, will continue to be on the political agenda, as the French presidency has announced that in November the Council of Ministers Culture will discuss the Commission communication, and we'll probably have new Council conclusions. And that is probably the period where we plan the launch of Europeana. And so November, say this year, will be quite charged, we hope, in terms of achievements for digital libraries. Quickly on high-level expert group. I already mentioned the composition of this group, the three areas that we've been addressing. Copyright. Let me first tell you that copyright, we have a layer of European legislation on copyright, and we have national legislation. At European level, copyright was not, over the last period, was not on the agenda. Therefore, this group worked on what was possible to achieve without changing the European legislation in terms of recommending to Member States possible actions, and also finding voluntary solutions. And I think they worked in a very constructive manner on two areas. One is orphan works. Orphan works is not a marginal issue, as the name may suggest. Orphan works are works whose right holders are not known or are not locatable. Therefore, you cannot clear rights, therefore you cannot digitize them, therefore you cannot make them available. The Gower's report on IPR in the UK mentioned an estimate, by the British Library, that 40% of the British Library collection could be considered orphan. And that's quite impressive. So the idea is to facilitate the use of orphan works, having either legislative solution, and this is the case, for example, in Nordic countries. The extended collective licensing, which is a general feature of their IPR system, is used also to clear in a kind of through bulk licensing also works that are orphan, and that facilitates the work of digitization by cultural institutions. What the copyright subgroup and then the high-level group has developed are a set of guidelines. These are called guidelines for due diligence search for orphan works. How can one declare that a work is orphan? This has been developed with involvement of right holders, and now we are expecting that these are somehow endorsed by right holders, organizations, and cultural institutions, so that we can have a better situation, even without legislative changes. That, of course, would make probably things simpler. On out-of-print works and out-of-distribution works, for example, we're talking not only about books, but, for example, audiovisual films, out-of-distribution. This is, again, an area where right holders have normally not big commercial interests. And these works are maybe just one copy in a library in a small place. And of course, it would be much easier to access if that copy could be digitized and made accessible to the internet. And what has been developed here by the high-level expert group is a model license for the digitization and accessibility of out-of-print works. This is, again, a voluntary model, private law. Originally, right holders had agreed on provision over secure networks, that is to say, more than the on-site accessibility, say online, but over secure networks. But now the most recent development is that we should have, and this will be discussed on 4th of June at the meeting of the high-level expert group, we should have a model license for online digitization and online accessibility of out-of-print work in full internet. And this, of course, will help a lot Europeana. The third area where the high-level expert group worked is scientific information. Their progress was much less evident. I'll come to that later, as I have a few slides on scientific information.
We have another 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. I'll touch digitization, of course, as this is the core of the conference today. What is the Commission recommending in digitization? It's recommending that member states create inventories of digitized material and make that available to the other member states. The principle is digitize once and distribute widely, so avoid duplication, create synergies. Devote substantial resources through coordinated plans, and as far as possible develop public-private partnership, because we can't rely simply on a public budget. And of course, public-private partnerships are interesting in particular because they provide, of course, technical expertise, infrastructure, but they provide budget and financial resources for digitization. I should say that the subgroup on PPPs, the high-level expert group chaired by Lina Brindley, we'll have her here tomorrow, so she maybe also mention that, developed a set of guidelines to avoid that PPPs produces paradox or dilemmas. We are talking about dilemmas of digitization, and there could be strange situation produced by an improper use of PPPs. I refer in particular, for example, to the fact that public domain content in the analog world could not be any more public domain or publicly accessible after it's been digitized through PPPs. Or we could have a situation where exclusivity arrangements in a partnership lead to restriction to free use of content that should be available. The last point concerning digitization is the recommendation that member states should set up, let's call it capacity building point, should set up digitization facilities, and this should be also reflected at European level by a network of competence centers for digitization. Through the FP7, the research program, we finance a project impact that is going exactly in that direction. So I would skip the other parts. Europeana, quite interesting. I think as we'll have soon the launch in November 2008, a foundation, a private law foundation based under the Dutch law. It must be said that the lead organization, or at least the operational service of Europeana, are based in The Hague by the Dutch Royal Library, and a foundation has been established with the participation of cultural institution, association of cultural institution, the Conference of European National Librarians, LIBER, who's the universities consortium, archives, museums. We have targets in terms of available objects, 2 million at the launch and 6 million by 2010. On scientific information, and I'm almost at the end, Chairman. I would like to mention that some could perceive in terms of dilemma again the debate on open access. I've seen there's a round table on Saturday. I think that would be very interesting. Open access is, I mentioned, has been the area where through the high-level expert group we've not really been able to achieve concrete progress. On one side we have the scientific publishers who claims that the present system is basically efficient and that any attempt to change it, to force a change, could disrupt it. And on the other side we have the scientific community that through the open access movement starting from the Berlin Declaration is claiming that there's an access problem, that public budgets, universities are paying 3 times for the information, are paying salaries of researchers, are paying the cost of the peer reviews, again through man-hour, and are paying the subscriptions for libraries. And that the impact of research would be maximized if we move towards a better, improved access system. The concrete progress that we've been able to achieve has been the creation of a experiment, a large-scale experiment with the involvement of scientists and publishers. This is through the STM association. This is called PEER and should start in a few months, and it's basically an experiment testing embargo periods for 300 publications and evaluating the impact, economic, scientific impact of open access following embargo period. We have as Commission a strong interest in following that, as a research budget is a considerable part of our budget. We devote 50 billion euros in FP7 to research. This was the main features of these were of the digital libraries initiative I wanted to mention to you. I think it is clear that on one side the digital paradigm and the networking it allows creates unique opportunities. On the other side, the complexity of the system is such that only through joining forces we can really try to exploit these unique opportunities and advance on culture and science accessibility. This, I think, the slide will be distributed, so there's no real need to take note. We'll change the URL. That's not user-friendly, the first one. The second one, it's easier. Thank you.